Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, I spoke with Isaac Souweine, partner at Real Ventures. Isaac, I've known for a few years, since his days at Frank & Oak, and he's one of the most well-known people in Montreal's tech ecosystem. A little bit of background on Isaac: he invests in early-stage Montreal-based companies as part of Real Ventures. He's also the GM of FounderFuel, which is Real Ventures' accelerator, and partner lead for Front Row Ventures, which is a student fund created by Real, which is really interesting. And prior to joining Real, Isaac built a career as a product manager, product leader, at high growth startups like Sonder and Frank & Oak. He's worked at large tech companies like Yahoo and Scholastic. And he also has a long track record of being a mentor, organizer, and ecosystem builder. He's a husband, dad of two, and Isaac believes that Montreal's the perfect place to raise a family while building a world-class startup ecosystem. And that's basically what he does all day long. We had a really good conversation where we spoke about how he transitioned from the world of religion and philosophy to the world of tech startups. The utility of being able to argue and to be able to tell a story. You know, his vocation of being a product manager for a long time. How he transitioned to venture capital, and some of the skill sets of product management that he brought to the world of VC, what it takes to build a vibrant startup ecosystem. And then we spoke about Real Ventures' investment thesis and what he's excited about in the ecosystem. We had a really, I think, interesting conversation, and we could have gone on for a few hours. I really enjoyed Isaac's very different viewpoints, and I hope that you learned something today. Thank you. Isaac, it's good to see you, man.
It is good to be here.
Yeah. I guess maybe it's the first question, and I'm happy that we had time to catch up. It's been a little while since I've seen you, so well, thanks for taking the time. I never really figured out how you got into the whole tech startup scene.
It's kind of a funny story. I mean, life is full of odd circumstances, and this is certainly one of them. I studied religion and philosophy in undergrad, and so I'm like a humanities guy, and was interested in different things as a student. Like, I was not particularly even thinking about how I might make money or get a job. So I was totally engaged in the pure liberal arts education at Columbia in New York. And a guy in my class, like on a very fringe, it was like a class on mysticism. He told me, well, I'm actually starting a company with two of my friends. These three Indian guys from New Jersey. And like, I kind of couldn't believe, I just didn't think he was the type. And in general, this was 97, 98.
How old were you at the time?
I was 19, 20 years old. And it was, .com boom. So clearly something was going on in society. It wasn't my focus in life. And so I went, and started doing some work for them. And to be honest, I still wasn't quite convinced, just because, like, who knows, is this product going to really work, et cetera. And then they said, well, we can see that you're not really convinced, but we're about to raise $4 million from these guys that we know. Cause it was like the end of the boom. So like everyone was tossing money into this internet sector. And at that point, I just said, like, something is happening here. It doesn't, this $4 million doesn't convince me more that the thing is going to work, but like, Columbia is not going anywhere. Like, why not take a year off or longer? Let's see how it goes. But why not take a leave of absence and join this opportunity that's been randomly presented to me? And so I left school, and my parents were obviously like, are you sure? And, well, I left. We worked for this company for a year, all of us. We spent all the money. We tried to raise more. The market crashed and the company was out of business, and boom, I was back in school. So I had this like very tightly packaged 1 year startup boom bust experience, and it just exposed me to the world. And I didn't immediately, I had 2 years of school to finish. I did more schooling after. I traveled. I lived in India. So I didn't come right back to it. But when I finally needed to get a job, you know, the reality of like, what skills do you have in the world? I said, well, I know a little bit about technology from this startup experience, and managed to use that to talk my way into a very entry level job at a publishing company, Scholastic, that was doing ed tech and games, and just got into it and worked my way up and found this role as a product manager, which was for me very much the guy who communicates and coordinates and brings people together and builds consensus, runs meetings, takes notes, creates specifications. And these were things I could do, even though I hadn't been trained as an engineer or anything. It played to some of my strengths as a communicator and as just, you know, a strategist, that sort of thing. And after that, you just follow your nose. So it was totally by chance. And I feel lucky, like technology was fabulous there then. It's even more, I feel somehow transformative now, what we're working with today. And to get a chance to like bring my own flavor to it has been such a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a more micro question, but what was the startup? I'm very curious.
The startup was called Student Online. It was not so different from what Oolala, what one of Real Ventures' portfolio companies does today, using technology to make the student experience more connected. We were doing email and chat boards and trying to do commerce, but it was in the pre-iPhone era. So we were missing the technology, you know, the hardware that would really make this. And it was also a very competitive space. The winner of our generation of companies was a company called, I think, Campus Pipeline, which is a well-established company now. I think it got acquired. So there were winners in our space. We were not one of them. There were about 5 companies doing what we were doing at that point.
Good idea, maybe just 15 years too soon.
You know, I think the winner won then. We were like the 5th company of that generation. So we were late to market even of those sort of web-based plays. Yeah, I mean, it was a legitimate space to be in, but you know, good ideas always breed competition. So you better have great timing and the best tech and all of that.
Is there anything from your religion and your philosophy background that you find is applicable today in your role?
Very much so, in various ways, but the one that's most prominent is that studying philosophy, you learn how to build arguments. You're trying to prove something about the nature of knowledge or logic, the way the brain works. Like philosophers kind of tackle many different topics, but they're always trying to say, not just this is the way it is, but let me convince you that it is this way because, you know, A leads to B and B leads to C. So it's a very structured form of thinking. And it's very much about building an argument. And that's how I view a lot of the work that I've done. So in product management, it was about, you know, building an argument for a feature. Like, why is this going to work? Like, I believe it will work for this and that reason. The customer said this, the data says that. And then you would, you know, go falsify or prove that argument, launch the product and see if it's working. And even more so in venture, literally what we do at the end of our process of due diligence and meeting the company, we write an investment memo, which is nothing more or less than an argument for the hypothesis behind the company. Like, we should invest in this company because the team is this, the market is this, the technology is that. So the ability to not just have good ideas, but present them in a very structured way. And like, I want to say, convince other people that what you have to say is true. Like that, I learned those techniques for kind of other purposes, but they've been very useful for the work that I do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like the ability to think clearly and present an argument is applicable, I think, in many different aspects of your career, right? Like you mentioned, product management, you have to convince IT, tech, CEO as to why a certain feature needs to be done. But it seems like it's the ultimate ninja skill in venture, because you're going on the faith of that this company will grow over time. So you need to present your reasoning as to why this story makes sense and why you think it'll grow.
Absolutely. And the story, yeah, it is about the story and about the long-term vision. And there's often, I mean, we invest at the earliest stages, so you don't have a lot of proof in the empirical sense, users or revenue or whatever. It's a lot about what you envision. So there's even more, we put more weight on the founder's ability to tell a story And then internally we hold ourselves to that same standard. Can you really like ultimately, like one of the things we say internally and when we write these memos and present these deals is like, why are we doing this investment? And by why, I mean, like, give me one reason. What is the one core reason? Is it because the market is so attractive? Is it because the technology is so disruptive? And, you know, 7 sort of good whys that's not convincing. 7 decent reasons to do a deal is much less compelling than one shining reason to do a deal, and being able to cut through everything else and present that. So I mean, people, when they study, should study whatever they think is interesting, but ultimately I think what you want to get out of whatever school or training is these transferable skills, and one of them is definitely argumentation and you know, logical thinking.
When you were on the client side, or I want to say more in the operations, when you're Frank and Oak or your previous startup, Pollenizer, what did you like the most? Obviously, your product management, but what aspect of that role, you know, jazzed you up in the mornings?
A number of things, but 2 that pop to mind when you ask the question. One more narrow and one a bit more broad. So narrowly, the vocation of product management in particular, I just found so gratifying and suited to me. And what I characterize it as is I was enabling all of these creators to make something that like is excellent and useful and beautiful or practical. And they could do stuff that I couldn't do. They could code, they could design, they could create in a very tangible way. I know digital sometimes feels like not tangible, but they really made stuff. But then, you know, great creators need someone to kind of organize the process of creation. Point that these powerful brains and these powerful abilities in this direction or that, keep all of the things that could distract them at bay, and create an environment where they can make something, and where that organizing force, that product manager, has a voice in it. Like, maybe we should do it that way, or have you thought about this? So I could both participate in the creative activity and also give them something that they didn't have. And that fusion of what I brought and what they brought, and making real things that went out in the world and people would use them and they would like them. It's just, it was like a thrill the first time I did it. And then I would ship a product 10 years later and I'm like, wow, this never gets old. Like, it just gave me chills to go from spec to release. So that part of creating digital products in a team and having a role to play, I loved. And then, especially as I got involved in startups, and certainly when I came to Montreal and at Frank and Oak and Sonder, so there was our product team and technology, and then there was the company, shaping a company culture, and you know, it's all people in the end, and the best companies win because they figure out how to not just like work hard and fast, but work well together. They believe in something together, and there's something like magical about being part of a company where things are working, especially if the business is working well, and then the culture is working well, and they kind of reinforce each other. And so one of the things, sort of my sidelight at both of those companies, was helping at the company level, building culture, you know, creating events and processes and different ways for people to communicate, and creating stuff that people could believe in, and the sort of the tissue of the company that joined everything together, and working with, you know, like Ishan and Ethan at Frank and Oak and Francis and Lucas at Sonder, to build not just products and not just a business, but actually to build a company. And that, of course, is now what I get to work on in a very different way on the venture side. Help founders, you know, with capital, but also help them not just, again, build a product or build a business, but really build a company.
Yeah, it sounds like you took your vocation of product management. Like, for me, you were like the ultimate product management guy that I knew, like, in the city, right? You knew that skill really, really well. So it looks like you took that skill and you basically brought it up at a more important level in the ecosystem, right? Did you ever foresee yourself jumping into venture? Was that like a natural path, or post Sonder, what led you to jumping into the venture world?
I wasn't looking for it. I'm not surprised I ended up in it. And if that's the way I would put it. It doesn't surprise me that I'm doing it now. When I came out of Sonder, I wasn't sure what I would do next, and I had known the people at Real well, and there was an opportunity, and they kind of approached me, so I didn't have to think about whether I should do it. It's more like an opportunity was presented, and then it was clearly the right timing. But I'm not surprised, because some of the, not so much on the capital allocation part. I mean, VCs we're money managers, we're financiers, and I didn't necessarily have a track record or even like a passionate interest in that side. But as I just described, I wasn't just interested in product development. I was really interested in company building. I was doing a lot of mentoring and advisoring. I was doing community building. I was organizing events. So all of these things that are quite typical VC type things that VCs often do, that's their job to do some of that. And especially a seed stage ecosystem focused VC like Real, this is, part and parcel of what the brief is. So in that sense, it's been a pretty easy transition, because I was already interested in doing all of these things as sort of a sidelight. And now it became hey, you can do these things full time, and we're going to teach you how to do the capital allocation and financing part of it, which is a specific domain that I was aware of. I knew how it worked, but I was never the CEO, so I didn't do those fundraising rounds. So that part has been the part that I had to learn and wrap my head around it. But, enough years in business, you sort of get it. I went to business school, so I have some sense of what that would be about. Of course, it's been there's a lot of layers, and I've learned a lot about it. So it's a great fit for me and my personality. And so I'm having a good time with it.
Was that the toughest part, the transition to, like you said, understanding capital allocation, metrics, term sheets, all the jargon that comes with it? Or was it more the shift in mentality, right? Because now it's a completely different kind of compensation, right? The feedback loop of a product manager is every sprint, right? Now the feedback loop is every fund, for instance, right? So it's maybe a bit tougher to get that immediate feedback. So I'm trying to understand, was it more on the philosophy side, or was it more in the technical aspect that you had to learn?
So the switch from the sprint cycle, the immediate feedback cycle, and the narrow single product, single market, all of that stuff, to lots of different products and markets, longer feedback cycle, epically long feedback cycle. That's a big shift, but it's sort of like the shift of when I moved from New York to Singapore, or Singapore back to Montreal. It's just a totally different world, but a nice one. I loved, there's great things about the sort of quick turns of the wheel of product management, but there's great things about the variety of meeting all of these founders and considering all these different industries. And honestly, the slower feedback cycle, I mean, there's some nice things, right? Yes, you don't know if you failed or succeeded. So you don't know if you failed or succeeded. So you have some time. The finance part is, there's a lot of complexity to it. But it's not the kind of thing that's that difficult to learn, especially, I mean, I'm so blessed. I'm around people who have been doing it for 10 years, and I can call any one of them and say, how would you price this? How would you negotiate this? She's asking for this change in terms. So even though there's a lot of stuff to learn, there's a lot of people to teach me. I guess the biggest, the part that's maybe been the hardest is, your product management, and a lot of functions like this, is very internally focused. So you end up, you're all about inside of the company. You kind of never leave those walls, or you do only exceptionally, maybe to talk to customers. And so you're dealing with the same group of people over and over and trying to build stronger and stronger teams. So you go from that to just interfacing with new people every day, tons and tons and tons of new people. And even for I'm very extroverted, I'm very people person, so I love it and I feed off of their energy, but it is, even for someone like me, it is grueling to just meet person after person, especially because a lot of them are coming for investment, and most of them you're not going to invest in. Some of them because it's just like never gonna be successful. Some of them because it might be successful, but it's not our kind of thing. And so constantly having these discussions, which are very, like as a PM, when I mentored an advisor or advised, like it was always just gravy to them. No one needed anything from me. Like I was giving freely of myself and it was being welcome. But here, like people they're looking for something and you're going to interface with them and it's sort of like super stimulating. Oh, that's your business. That's so interesting. What do you do? What about that? How do you get customers? But at the end of the day, they're like, well, that was a nice chat. So like, do you want to invest? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a conversation with a specific endpoint. And so going through that cycle over and over again and learning how to manage it and learning how to, for example, if you know you're not going to invest in a company, like let them know right away so that A, they don't waste their time with you, or B, you can have a nice conversation with them and they're not feeling like they're trying to get something out of you because you say, I just want you to know right off, like, we don't do that geography, or like, we're not interested in this space, or, you know, et cetera, rather than like letting it build up too much. But that's a skill. Like it's very, you know, just one of many examples, you know, so you have a 30-minute call with the person and you know, after 10 minutes that it's going to be a pass for some good reason or other. And you can either pass on the phone, or you can get to the end of the call and then you're going to have to write a 15-minute email, or you're going to spend 15 minutes to write like a formal pass email. Now, like both of those are fine outcomes and you can be polite and respectful in either way, but you're going to save yourself and everybody a lot of time if you can get to the pass on the phone. But you have to think about like, how do I do this and make sure it's clear to this person? And, you know, like it's not that easy. And so learning how to manage managing the human interactions, which have their own dynamic, that's been the hardest part because there are a lot of them.
Yeah. The people skills, I imagine, right? Because as you said, you're interfacing with a bunch of people that it's all business / commercial discussions, right? It makes sense, but you said these people are expecting something always, right? They're always in the selling seat, right? Versus, you're not always have to sell. I imagine sometimes you do, right? When you're after like an attractive company, but you're often in the being sold to seat, right? Has it gotten easier or harder over time to like find good companies that could want to potentially work with? And also the kind of like corollary to that, the types of products that people are building. Have you seen an improvement? Like curious to see how the job has evolved since you started.
Well, it's definitely getting easier because I now can understand what these different types of interactions. Okay, this is one where I should spend less time, more time. I should communicate with this person in this way and that way. I'm learning more about what kind of investments or companies that I would want to do. So managing those dozens of interactions each week. And by the way, not just with, you know, one thing that came as maybe a bit of a surprise is, so it's people all day long, meetings all day long, but maybe half of them are with entrepreneurs. The other ones are with other potential co-investors, ecosystem people who want to get jobs in startups, and potential LPs for our next fund, government people, policy people, other incubators. And so, the more of each one of those you go, oh, okay, this is, I get it. This person could invest in us. Okay, this person, I could help him or her in this way, and learning to see what the patterns are. So all of that keeps getting easier because I'm getting more practice and figuring out, where I stand in all of these conversations. In terms of, well, I don't have enough of a longitudinal sample to see like massive progress. I've been at it for like a year and a half or so. I would say, though, having watched the Singapore ecosystem develop over many years and now watching the Montreal ecosystem develop, people keep getting better, but it moves sort of inexorably forward, but it's not something that, it feels like it's moving rapidly, but at the same time, there's so much to do that to grow from, an okay ecosystem to a great ecosystem to a world-class ecosystem. It takes time. It takes cycles. It takes imagine the journey of an individual entrepreneur who starts a company and it fails. And that takes a year or two. And then he or she learns something out of that and then starts another company or joins a company. This is how it gets done. So it's it's like soil developing in the forest. Like it develops over time,
and it takes exits, right? It takes
exit and takes capital and all of this stuff. So, I mean, I'm thinking we just participated in an investment. I don't think it's public yet, but the founder was on his third company and the first two didn't go well. So he had two kind of failures under his belt, and he really learned from them. And you could see that now he was kind of ready to win. Like somehow that the tide was ready to turn. And so that process took 4 or 5 years. And his co-founder had also gone through a few startups during that period. And so together, you could see how what they were doing today was not just when did you found the company, but actually it was a 5-year process that started before they even knew each other. And I think that's it takes time. But if you think about Montreal, I mean, I've been in Montreal 5 years. So the level of sophistication on a population level, how good is the deal flow? How good are the founders? I mean, it's night and day over 5 years. So you can really see the trend line, not so much since I started doing VC, but over those 5 years. And now we just meet founders and say, wow, you've got it together, right? And that more and more is the case. And you're meeting people who have had a track record. They tried this, they tried that, they were a part of this, they were a part of that. So I think people are getting a lot stronger. And the fund we're running, this Orbit strategy, where we have a pool of capital just dedicated to the Montreal ecosystem, I don't know what that looks like 5 years ago in terms of the quality of deal. I don't know if you could do as many deals as we're going to do, just focusing on one ecosystem. So I think that reflects the improvement here. And you see a similar thing in other ecosystems.
Yes. Well, you're talking about ecosystems, and I find you guys are also Real's largely responsible for some of this progress, right? It's remember back in 2007 when Real started, right? There was very, very, should I say, bare bones. And I'd love to dive into FounderFuel, right? Maybe so explain for people that don't know what FounderFuel is. Obviously, the guys behind it at Real, and also how you split your time, because you've been spending, it seems like, more time. Obviously, it's very, should I say, episodic when there's a requirement with a new cohort. But I'd love to understand the thinking, how you guys came about it, and now kind of the progress that you've seen.
Sure. So FounderFuel, in brief, is a 3-month accelerator for, generally speaking, Canadian companies. So it's modeled off of Techstars. It was actually inspired originally those years ago when John Stokes went to Boulder and saw what they were doing and said, hey, we can do this in Canada. I think the first cohort was in 2011. And I think one of the things, so now, I mean, the money has changed. I think it started as 25K. Now it's 120K. But mostly we're running the same model, as is Techstars and other people. 3 months, invest some money, mentorship, programming, do a demo day, and help the companies hop onto the venture path. So I think one amazing thing about FounderFuel and Techstars and these other organizations is that even as VC and the financing landscape, it changes and evolves pretty quickly. But that model is, roughly speaking, as relevant or more relevant today as it was back then. And I still think it's about roughly the same thing it was back then, which is this, it's an interesting bundle. Here's some capital, here's some support and network, and here's a signal to the investment community. So those are the things we provide. We kind of push the company forward a little bit, but at the same time, we're doing the hard work of going through 200 applications and saying, these companies, these are worth a look for you. And we'll even put the first check in. And so much in the way that a business school kind of vets talent for a consulting company, we vet talent for further VC, for VCs down the line. And I think that's true of a YC or a Techstars or anybody. So, and that's what FounderFuel is. And I think that what I just described matches up to many accelerators. And our motivation, behind the program, again, is the same as it was back then, which is, on the one hand, build a valuable portfolio. You get good prices as an accelerator. You do hard work, but you can get a favorable deal. You can get equity in these companies. And in the VC model, we've had, I think, 90 companies go through FounderFuel. And right now we're sitting on 10 or so really strong companies. So it's it's a viable investment strategy where you can build a valuable portfolio, and it's very viable if you have a VC fund backing it, because then the VC fund can put money into all the winners. And that's what's happened with a Sonder, Expert C, a Login Radius, an Unsplash. Like, those companies do well. They attract other investment capital, and then Real puts more money into them. So the motivation on the one hand is like, hey, this is just another way to invest at the early stage and get into the good companies. But it's also a way to build community. And on that second side, I would say what makes FounderFuel a bit unique is how much we believe that the program is not just for those 7 companies or 8 companies. It's not just for Real Ventures. It's for the Montreal ecosystem. Like, there's a reason we throw a 1,000 person demo day. It's not because we think it's going to drastically increase the number of investments versus just running a small private demo day for investors. It's because we want to see the whole community get jazzed about startups, see what we're up to, see each other, have a good time, have a party. And I think Real, our pillars are backing companies like any VC, backing great companies, and building ecosystems where those companies can thrive. Those are the things we always try to do. And whenever possible, we'd like to do both of those at the same time. If we can write a check that also builds ecosystem, like we get our 2 wins, like we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And so that's what FounderFuel is. Like, we're writing checks, we're investing in companies, but at the same time, we're creating this thing that, the sponsors can involve. We have our mentor pool. We have 100 mentors. They show up. It gives them something to do. It gives them a way to give back. They connect with our companies. They connect with each other. It just gives, like, it creates collisions and interactions between people. And we just facilitate that. And so, as just one more example of what you can do with a program like this. So we had amazing speakers this year. Every year we get founders and, marketing experts, sales, whatever. And for the last 2 years, what we've done is we'll take about 15 companies that made it basically to the final round. And we just they didn't get into the program. Maybe they were too early, or maybe we're just wrong. Maybe we should have picked them. And we say, you guys were close. So we're interested to work with you. Maybe we're going to, maybe in the future we could work with you. So we just invited them to all of the content, not all of it, but we open sourced a lot of the content. And so we'd have, cause I say, like, a speaker is going to come in. They're already going to give their talk. It's relevant to my teams, but it's relevant to another 15 teams. I don't lose anything by inviting them. In fact, I gain something. The speaker has a bigger audience. They're happier. The room feels more alive. And now, maybe that company is the next one we're going to invest in. And so it's like so easy to do that. I mean, you have to do a little work. You have to email them, and you're just producing more value for the ecosystem. And we know that if we keep doing that, we'll get value back in the end.
Yeah. Going back to feedback loops, right? I like how your analytical mind has taken, like, hey, how can you create an ecosystem, which is your end product, and develop it right across cohorts of mentors, entrepreneurs, obviously startups. So it's a very interesting approach. What do you think is lacking right now in the ecosystem, right? There's obviously, I think we've got the wind on our sails, particularly Montreal, Toronto. There's a lot of good news lately. What do you think is lacking structurally for us to kind of like get it to the next level?
I just want to say a lot is going right. Like it's things are really moving forward, and I see that as the result of really efforts at so many different levels, governmental efforts, like organizations that are like university efforts and organizations attached to the universities, private capital, quasi-public capital, like the pension funds. So I think Montreal in particular and Canada in general is really clicking, and a lot of things are functioning well. So to the point where I'm not like, oh, there's this burning fire over here. For us at the early stage, and really anything pre-Series A, which is, anything pre-Series A is still probably going to be funded locally. Now you have some US investors who are coming up and investing at the seed stage in Canadian companies, but still seed capital tends to be local. And while there's been an influx of seed capital, so there's more accessible to the companies, I think you could make an argument that there's still not that much. Like in this town, for example, the number of firms that we can co-invest with at our pre-seed stage, which is really the new seed, right? Like at rounds under $1 million, first check into a company. There's not 20 or 30 firms, there's 3 or 4 and some angel groups. And that's sufficient to fund the best companies. So I'm not saying there's not capital out there for founders. But if you compared that to other ecosystems that are just, in the US or in London or whatever, that are just, I don't know the London ecosystem in particular, but I know some of the US ones, there's just more access to capital, which means that there's more companies that can get funded. And also companies can get funded more comprehensively, right? Like we'll have a lot of good companies that will raise a third of what they could raise if they were in another market. Now, that also has some positives. They're scrappy, they're more capital efficient and don't necessarily, like, money can cause a lot of problems too, but I would, we're in a global competition here. Like, so we're, I don't think we can measure ourselves against where we were 5 years ago, and we're going to see, like, triple digit growth on whatever your KPI, and we can be very happy that these ecosystems are really flourishing. But the real contest is not between Montreal 2018 and Montreal 2013. It's Montreal versus Toronto versus New York versus Silicon Valley. Like these ecosystems can work together, but to some degree, where's the next great company going to come from? Where's the capital going to flow to? Where are the immigrants going to immigrate to? All of those things, like, they might come here, they might come there, but not everybody can be the top ecosystem. And so I think, we're trying to play with, we're trying to compete with the best. And so to compete with the best, you need more of everything that we have. And one thing that we certainly don't have as much of as some other ecosystems is super early stage capital. So I can point to that. I live VC now, so maybe that's the thing I can see. The other thing in the Montreal ecosystem, and this is coming to mind just as I'm thinking it, we have amazing engineering talent here. We have amazing design and creative talent of various kinds. But when you get into the business side, product management talent, sales talent, marketing talent, that can come in as a VP. You know what I mean? That's already led teams, that's worked at big companies, that seasoned people in their 30s and 40s who have already excelled and are ready to join a scaling startup and be a leader. We don't have that many of those, like we don't have, to take product management as an example, because I know it well, we don't have Googles and Facebooks that are training product managers in our market. So the only people who are training them are, the light speeds and such. And they haven't trained that many. Yes, a lot of people have gone through the Lightspeed, product org, but we're talking about 30 or 40 or 50 people. We need hundreds. And so I think, and Shopify's or whatever. So we have some companies that are helping to build talent, but again, we're trying to compete with other markets. So we could use more of that kind of business talent. And I think, to be honest, to get it, we have to train it, but we also have to attract it. Like I think I spent 6 years in Singapore, and Singapore, which is a random island in the middle of Southeast Asia, convinced the world that you should travel to Singapore and live there for a couple of years. And now people from Sydney and London and New Delhi and whatever, they go spend time in Singapore. So it's possible. Anywhere can become a mecca for talent. We could too, but we have to think that way. And I think Montreal and Quebec, to some degree, has not always thought about itself in that way, as a place where, people should come and pursue their success here. But if we really want to be better than we are, we have to be that kind of place, like the way that the Valley is or the way that New York is. And so that's one of my aspirations. I'm an expat here. I'm from the States. And I come here and I'm sort of like, what a jewel of a city. What an amazing place. We have this thriving ecosystem. You should move here. You know what I mean? And how do we project what we're doing? How do we tell our story to the world so that the next product manager says, you know what, like Boston, I'm bored, like I'm coming north. So I think that's when we'll know that we've taken the next step. Because now you say, why did you move to Quebec? And the answer is, well, you know, I met a girl and she brought me back, which is fine. I mean, that's why I'm here. I followed my wife here, but there has to be other reasons for people to come here.
Yeah, great food is one of them. So you mentioned a few key points. I just want to go back. I really like the idea of letting 1,000 flowers bloom, right? Which has been kind of the key to success in, you know, Silicon Valley, where it's like you just invest in a bunch. It's hard to know in advance. Back to your point of storytelling, there's going to be one in a very high failure rate. But that's the one in 100 is going to be that $1 billion corp, which ends up being a Shopify, a Google, or an Uber, which then kind of builds that ecosystem, right? So I find that both points kind of marry each other really, really well. I want to go back to the ecosystem part for a second. What do you think is happening right now that's not getting enough attention, right? There's a lot of things that are hyped that everyone is talking about, AI, etc. What do you think is underrated or misunderstood?
Interesting. Well, I don't know if it's underrated, but I'll say like one of the frontiers for us and an area where we think there's more to be done is in the university communities. So Montreal in particular, if you want to think about what Montreal is world class at, education, it is actually world class. Like it's like a top 10 global city in terms of its universities. And that means an amazing talent factory, but also, and especially on the engineering side, but also an amazing factory for IP, and for company building. And I think that historically, I mean, I don't know the full history of the Canadian university ecosystem, but I get the sense that the pathways to commercialization and the links between the university communities and the communities of capital and business communities and wealth creation have not always been as tied together as they could be. And so we see, and I think this is happening. So that's why I don't mean to say it's not, this is core to the Element AI thesis. This is core to a lot of what's happening in this efflorescence of the Montreal AI community is, hey, like look at all these amazing researchers and look at all the amazing stuff they've done. So I don't think it's like a secret anymore, but I think there's even more there and even more we can do to take the talent and the IP that's coming out of these truly world-class institutions and marry them with what we know how to do, which is company building and commercialization. And so, one of the first projects that I started working on when I joined Real, which now has a lot of momentum and reflects, I think, this opportunity is Front Row Ventures, which is Canada's first student-run VC fund. We provided the first capital for this. We allocated $600,000 over 4 years to the group in Quebec. It's 3 founders who now we're sort of merging the whole thing with Real Ventures, and they created a whole program where they trained students on how to do VC, and then they source companies, do due diligence, write investment memos, and then approve 25K investments into companies. They made 6 investments over the last year in their Montreal chapter. Great investments, like some stuff that we had known about, but hadn't looked at yet, companies we had never seen. So they're like sourcing unique companies. They're doing an amazing job, like doing VC and then allocating capital and making investments. So now we're going to try and raise a full fund for that and expand it to across Canada. And I'm excited about that project, partly because the founders are amazing who we're working with on it, partly because we can see that it's working. And also I love working with young people and students. They bring a sort of new way of seeing the world and a ton of energy, but partly because it matches up to what I just said, that thesis that the university ecosystems are underdeveloped in terms of company building, entrepreneurship, and commercializing great IP. So I think that might be one area where there's more to do in the coming years.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? And you can see our are lagged versus, let's say, a Stanford, right? Where, two kids in a campus thinking about, this algorithm, how do we, do something with it, and like, how does it work? And it ends up being, kind of a successful
Stanford, MIT, it's more developed.
Yeah.
And I think the US has a different culture around company building and commercialization. So it's, we don't have to be them, but I think like these are amazing institutions. And I think there are some people in there who would like nothing more than to build companies. And so we can just make it easier to have that happen.
What are you most excited about? Like maybe both personally, professionally, about the ecosystem, or thesis that Real's starting to invest more and more in?
3 or 4 years ago, Real has always been a broad-based, let's call it sector agnostic, technology agnostic investor with a geographic thesis. Like there are great companies in Canada. Seed capital is typically local, and therefore we can be the firm that invests in these companies at the seed stage and help them grow and access more capital across the border. So it's always been a geographic thesis rather than a sectoral or technology thesis. But that said, 3 or 4 years ago, that AI became, roughly the technology thesis, or at least like we see that as the next really crucial part of the technology stack and a very transformative one. And that's driven a ton of investments out of the firm before I joined and continues to drive a lot of the investments. So we're looking for companies that are using, and AI is this super broad term, but I think it's appropriately broad because it covers a lot of different things. And there's, all sorts of different parts of the AI stack where you can invest. So that has been the thesis for the past 3 or 4 years. And for me, it still is. Like there are new things developing, and we're taking a look at where else technology will go. But I'm very motivated by digging in on this AI thesis and looking for companies that are applying this technology. And the reason is I truly think it's transformative at a profound level, and that we're just scratching the surfaces. And, the AI, or the various technologies that make up AI, are already massively powerful, are going to get increasingly powerful. Like we're just, we haven't seen what they can really do. And what has to happen now is this new powerful capability. Let's call it computer brains. They're very narrow-minded computer brains. They can only do certain things, but they do them very, very well. These computer brains have to be inserted into products that fit into markets and create value. So it's still the old trick. Like you have to find a customer that has a problem. You have to you have to understand what his or her problem is. You have to build an interface or a software that they could use. And then you have to build a team around that and scale that team and build sales and marketing functions. So it's the same company building challenges, but you're now just like bringing computer brains as part of the value prop or part of the technological capability. So that's going to take a long time. Like even if these AI technologies didn't develop further, there would be a whole like set of companies that could be built off of just what's in front of us. But it will take time to build those companies, let alone as the capabilities keep developing, there will be more and more new kinds of companies. And so I'm happy to play this thesis out for many, many years because I think it's that deep a technology and we're really just on the starting point. So I'm very excited about continuing that work at Real and especially in the Montreal ecosystem. That said, we're like one of the things that's been hardest for me to learn about a VC is really how future oriented you need to be, because product managers are very present or near future oriented. Like we're building for the next quarter or the next year. And so we're already trying to think about where these technologies are headed, for example, in robotics or, for example, in neuroscience, right? Like what's going to happen when you actually have interfaces that can plug in directly to the brain or into the central nervous system? What's going to happen when you can really build robots? Like we just made this is just one of many companies, but one of our FounderFuel companies is, robotic chefs, like robot cooking, which is just at its infancy. So what happens when robots can do like things that are quite complex and are very core to what is human existence today? So I think, and a lot of that is watching AI play out. Like robotics is sort of AI playing out in physical hardware. Neuroscience or neurotech is largely AI playing out in neuroscience. So that's why I think like AI will remain the thesis, but it's going to start to animate all these wild areas that sometimes are a little bit like far-fetched and hard to believe today. But our job is to project our minds forward and think about what society will look like 10 or 20 years from now as driven by these technologies. So that's what's keeping me interested.
Isaac, super inspiring, man. Like, I think we could probably go on for hours.
I certainly could. I'm having a blast in this job and being able to participate in the ecosystem in this way. But yeah, so love chatting about this.
I loved your feedback. Particularly the last question. Like we'll have to do a round two at some point. But
absolutely, give me a year and I'll have some more interesting stuff to share.
Last question for you, Isaac, is where can people find out more about yourself, about Real, what you guys are doing?
Sure. So, I try to put some time into Twitter because I think it's an amazing ecosystem of information and sharing. So I'm on Twitter at Son of Sarah. I just encourage people to reach out. Isaac at Real Ventures. I'm not hard to find on the website or on LinkedIn. And we're always looking to meet founders, to meet players in the ecosystem and especially people who are not from Montreal and are looking to understand about what's going on. We've been organizing tours for big corporates or VCs or whatever. We just, or something formal or we just have a coffee and tell people what's going on. So anybody who's looking to connect about what's going on in Montreal or in AI investing or any of the stuff that we talked about, just reach out online, drop a line, and we do this all day. We're happy to connect and have a chat.
Super cool, Isaac. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.